Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a really fascinating question posed by one of you that I just am dying to sink my claws into, and I can't answer all of it, but you'll understand why when you hear what it is. The question was this: now that the academic serialist interruption in our musical lives is essentially over, and composers have returned to tonal composition, more or less, what is going to happen to the writing of music history? That is the kind of history that we've been taught in our schools, things which says that there was like Bach and Handel and the First Viennese School and Beethoven and the other romantics, and then a certain detour into romantic nationalism, and it all came together after Wagner in the destruction of tonality and the triumph of 12-tone or total chromaticism, resulting in the Second Viennese School, which was an apotheosis of the development of Western art music. And now that we hate that stuff, and it's okay to hate that stuff, and composers have largely shirked it, and other schools have arisen, what happens to that music history? I mean, boy, is that a complicated question, isn't it? But I think we can get at it in certain ways. And pardon the voice, of course, I'm still recovering from my cold. This will take several weeks. A little tea, there we go. But we can get at this by looking at a few general points. The first is this: art history generally, whether it's music or painting or architecture, whatever you want, sculpture, pick your art, is essentially winner's history. Now, I've talked about this before. I have two master's degrees in modern European history. I mean, I was trained as a historian. I taught history. And so I have a strong feeling about that based on what I was taught. And what we're taught as real historians is that winner's history is bad. Winner's history is terrible. Why? Because it's written by the winners. It means there's no historicism. In other words, historicism is the idea of trying to evaluate historical materials in the way they would have been viewed at the time in question, not by applying our value judgments and the abundance of hindsight to determine what must have been important back then. Music history is that. It is a selection of things that we regard today as important, which may or may not have been important to the day in question, which we link up using the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy, which means in Latin, before post hoc, after this, therefore because of this, that we create an artificial causality that so-and-so led to so-and-so, led to something, led to this, led to that, by isolating those elements that we choose to identify as the unifying thread throughout the long duration of history. And so we're taught that in the Baroque period, Bach and Handel were big deals, and they became somehow highly respected models for the Second Viennese School of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, even though there were many other highly respected models who may have been even more important and who were even more popular or more famous. I mean, who cares about what was happening just in Vienna and its environs? I mean, that's already taking that and generalizing it to all of Western music. I mean, it's a ridiculous thing when you phrase it that way, but that's what we do. And then after Beethoven, you've got all the other romantic people who came later, and you have the German school of Brahms and Wagner in the second half of the 18th century, which pissed on the Italian school of Verdi and Donizetti and Bellini and the Italian opera school and vocal tradition. And then there was France, which was always French and ignored everybody else, and England, which had no music whatsoever, except for Purcell and then Handel, and then the 200 years of nothingness until Elgar popped up mysteriously as if nothing was happening in the interim. I mean, it's a very patchy view. Even if we accept it, it's a very patchy view. We know that it can only reflect tiny, minuscule percentage of actual musical activity and the things that really mattered. I mean, the most popular composer in the first half of the 19th century was Spohr as a symphonist and orchestral composer. Does anyone care about Spohr now? So, yes. I mean, the answer is that music history, as winner's history, has always been defective. It's always been a slanted, prejudiced view of musical history because it was invented as a function of musicology, which was a German nationalist 19th century enterprise. So naturally, the German nationalist school of orchestral and instrumental music became the model, and that's the cat, became the model of all that was great and good, and everything else was lesser and not as great and good. And we all know that that's just garbage. Anyone who loves music knows it's garbage. But that's what we were taught, because you have to be taught something, right? And that led in turn to the Second Viennese School in Schoenberg and Berg and Webern. And I went through this, as a lot of you did. I mean, even in grammar school, there was a book called Making Music Your Own. Remember that? And in this textbook, you were taught music history. And eventually, you got to, like, after Wagner, you had to listen to bits of Wozzeck and something of Webern, usually. Schoenberg was even too complicated. But that's what we were taught. That was music history. Well, I think that the person who asked the question was entirely correct in saying that, yes, it needs serious revision. What that revision will be, we don't know, because we're in the middle of it. We can't tell what future generations are going to value, because unfortunately, music history will, maybe for just pragmatic reasons, will continue to be winner's history. And we're going to decide who the winners are, but 200 years from now or 300 years from now, it would not surprise me if the entire tonal universe, the Romantic period was regarded as, from Beethoven through the year 2250. It could be. It depends on what those future generations regard as important. Certainly the view of the academic serialist and the whole serialist concept needs to be revised. It needs to be revised. I don't think it should be dismissed. It was important. There were also great masterpieces of music written in that style, which will endure, and they will be subsumed into the larger current of active repertoire music that we treasure. And so it's a current, it's a movement, but not the most important one. It's not the culmination of anything. It's a part of an ongoing process, and it may turn out to be just a little rivulet, a little diversion along the much broader path. That's how I think it's going to happen. What's going to happen, of course, because there's a winnowing process. We're going to trash all the stuff we don't care about, preserve the few things that we really like, and those will be elements of a particular style as part of a larger continuum. And remember, music history isn't a monolithic thing. It is a continuum. Just go into an American concert hall that was built at the turn of the 20th century and look at the names of the composers. It always fascinated me to go up there and you look and you see, okay, there's Mendelssohn. He's like big, big, big. And Beethoven and Bach and Handel. But you also get Spohr and Gluck and MacDowell. MacDowell was the American composer. God knows there was no Charles Ives. There were none of the minimalists. There was no Gershwin. The whole idea of who these people are is completely different today than what it was 100 years ago. And that's going to just continue happening. The shape of who we value, our choice of the winners, is always going to be different. It would be nicer, I think, as a historian, if we could actually understand something more of who was really popular at the day and why they were popular, and enjoy them for the reasons people enjoyed them back then. Sometimes we can get to it. The period instrument movement has helped us to do that, I think. It's been one of its good aspects. Everything has its pluses and minuses. Its minus is the horrible way the music sounds. The good part is that it does tell us something about how this music was enjoyed and what about it may have been enjoyed in its closer to conjecturally original format. So there are ways to get to get back to that. And as record collectors and music lovers, we, of course, are always interested in finding something new. But even there, you have to remember, we're listening to this stuff not in the way that anybody back then listened to it. We enjoy it because it's new. I mean, because it's new and different, because it's not the same old, same old. But it isn't new and different, and it was not enjoyed back in the day because it was new and different. It was enjoyed quite often because it was familiar and conventional. And what was familiar and conventional in the 19th century for us can be astonishingly vibrant and original based on our own experience. So there's no simple answer. Obviously, there's no simple answer to this question, but it is the right question. A very, very good question. Something that I really think is valuable to think about because we are witnessing the changing of the paradigm. And I really wonder whether or not the textbooks are going to be updated accordingly. Ultimately, they will be, of course, because they'll be written by academics who are not part of that old crowd who wrote the former pile of textbooks. But yes, the answer is yes. It's going to change. It has to change. But it will continue to be winner's history because music history will always be the history of those things that we value and the attempt to validate those things by taking as evidence for their value a long provenance and history of similar elements being appropriated, developed, and modified according to our own modern tastes. I mean, that's just the way it's going to happen because nobody can take in all of it. We don't have time. Life is too short when it comes to the arts. The arts are all about, people object to it when I say this, that they're just entertainment, but I mean that. They really are. They're just entertainment. It's about what pleases us. It's not about what mattered to someone 150 years ago. If we're going to devote time to art, that is, to going and looking at paintings or listening to pieces of music or doing these things, we obviously want to choose. It's a selection process. And that's unavoidable. And so that selection process is going to be subject to all of our own biases and prejudices and all of the accumulated knowledge that we have. And we are going to want to validate our choices by telling ourselves how smart and tasteful and elevated and cultured we are. And we're going to do that by demonstrating that the thing that we are looking at today that we like is part of this continuum of cultural greatness. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, intellectually, it's wrong, and it may be suspect in any number of other ways, but it's how we enjoy and appreciate art. And all of the bullshit about how scientific art history can become, or music history can become, and how it adopts the modalities of sociology and other social sciences to try and give itself this patina of scientific legitimacy, which it does in academia, and you can't believe how stupid that gets. I mean, it just gets to be absolutely insane. At bottom, it's about what we enjoy and why we enjoy it, what matters to us, and that's never going to change. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you for this wonderful question. I think it's absolutely a fascinating thing to think about, even though we can't really answer it in any sensible way. We can think about it, and that in itself is a joy. Take care.